This is a reflection on something I've noticed lately. I have a lot of friends who work in the software development IT industry, and I find a lot of them aren't quite happy with their jobs, particularly if they're in a large corporation where the projects they're on are decided for them, and the tools that they use are decided for them, and their code is reviewed by someone else. They feel like a part of a machine, and there's not a lot of space for innovation or creativity. And I can see why that would be a problem. But what I'm reflecting on right now is that my experience was very different, and I'm not sure what caused the differences. I'm not sure if there was an external difference, like in the way corporations approach programming. But I thought I would share it. There may be some valuable insights. So my very first programming job, I started very young. My first proper programming career was with Sony when I was 19. I had been brought in as a network engineer to basically run cables through ceilings and work out their token ring network and hammer ends together and keep the whole facility running. So it was a manufacturing facility of 2,000 people, and they needed the whole thing to be wired. And that's what I did. But as I was traveling through the facility, I met everybody. I met every department. I knew customer services. I knew the marketing department, because anytime someone had a problem with their PC, I was the one who would go and fix it, install new software, replace hard drives, whatever. And my passion was programming. Programming was what I'd always really been fascinated with. But I was still in university. I was in the early stages of my university study. So I didn't have the certifications and, for programming. Now, at Sony, at this facility, the programmers there were all mainframe programmers. They worked on reports of manufacturing and finances and customers. And this facility was produced DVDs and CDs. So it was a very manufacturing-oriented type of situation. They really didn't use PCs much. They didn't program them. They just used them as office tools. They had Excel and Word, and everyone had one. Everyone on the office side had a PC, but they didn't have any custom software for them in any way. They didn't see the point. And for them, even a network of PCs was a rather new thing. They didn't quite understand what they could do with. This was ages ago. So they had PCs running Windows, they had applications, but a lot of the people in the company didn't really have the resources and tools that they needed to do their job effectively. And they weren't aware of that. But because I was going around as a software designer enthusiast, my entire mindset was about solving problems. And everywhere I could see problems. Everywhere that needed to be solved. Really interesting problems. And I think this is the case that I continue to see, is that every large corporation, you walk in and you see a gold mine of problems waiting to be solved. The ones that are really fascinating and that also have an enormous financial benefit to the business are the ones that you can really just take this project and go talk to your boss and say, look, I've noticed this piece of software, this solution would save you $2 million a month. And I've done this before. And basically, when they can see the value of that and they can see your enthusiasm for it, I'm sure that's also probably a part of it. Pretty quickly, you now own that project. You're now responsible for that project. Now, this was the way I worked. So at Sony, I wasn't part of the software team. I had nothing to do with the mainframes at all. I didn't know COBOL. I didn't want to learn COBOL. But as I was going around the company, I would see these problems. And at one point, I noticed, there were a lot of them. Well, at one point, I noticed in the sales department, I guess you would call it, I think they called it customer services, but it was more like receiving orders and processing orders. And they had a row of fax machines, and the faxes would come in, and they were rather chunky at the time, low resolution faxes oftentimes on thermal paper, which made it just way worse. And being Sony, a lot of the orders they were getting were in Japanese. So you'd have handwritten kanji on a fax on thermal paper with very low resolution, and it was very difficult to read sometimes the order form that had been filled in. And this really crystallized for me when a customer service rep just happened to walk up to me, and she showed me a fax she was holding, and she asked, "Does that say 1,000,000 or 100,000?" She couldn't tell. And it was the quantity of CDs that were being ordered for a new Mariah Carey release. It made a big difference, but it wasn't easy for her to call Japan back and say, "Hey, can you clarify this order?" There were a lot of processes and problems that made her job very, very difficult. And I saw that and I thought, that's ridiculous. Why are you using faxes to transmit orders, especially such high value orders? And I just, at the time, that looked like a really interesting problem to solve. So I went to the director of that department. I can't remember his name right now, but I went to the director of that department. He was a nice guy. And I said, "Look, I was 19, so I was a kid, but I just wanted to say, I noticed that you've got these orders coming in by fax. I think there's a much better way they could come in by software so that your team could actually, see on their screen what they're processing. It'd be easier for your customers as well to send these." And he was very interested. So he went to the CIO, my boss, and very soon I was no longer doing networking. I was a special projects programmer. They actually created a new role for me and offered me a salaried position at age 19 because they had this problem they could see really needed to be solved, and I was the only one they knew who could solve it. So they made a nice offer to me. You solve this problem, you can come into this role, we'll set you up with a PC, you'll work with the programmers, but you won't have to touch COBOL, and you solve it however you want. So this was the perfect situation for me. I got to use the technologies I wanted. I got to work on a problem that I found interesting, that I'd identified, so I had ownership of it. I knew how it impacted the business. I knew the benefits it was going to give them, and that was exciting. And I knew the customers whose lives it was going to change. My customers, meaning the customer services department itself. I knew those people. All of these things made this a very fun and interesting project. And I did it. I built it. And it goes even further than that. The software ended up winning an award from Microsoft. It was kind of a client-server architecture I built, all based on Windows software. So Microsoft loved that, and they wanted to show that off because they were just at that point trying to make the Windows desktop something that businesses wanted and could see the value in. And this was a great example of that in action. This was like 1993. Yes. 1993, Windows World Open. This was ages ago. It's amazing how much things have changed now. What would you do without a computer at your desk? I don't know. This was all pre-internet, so I had to solve problems about how do I transfer data from this computer to this computer across the world with no internet. BitNet was still in its early stages, and the whole problem, the problem-solving opportunities were huge, and I really, really loved this situation. So the software ended up winning an award. I ended up getting flown to Atlanta to have dinner with Bill Gates, which was enormous fun. Again, still just a young kid full of ideas. And Bill he's one of my favorite people. He is just a very down-to-earth person. And I have to say, I was a little worried about that. A 19-year-old kid walking in and sitting down and having a dinner chat one-on-one with the man who's just become the richest man in the world. And you're like, this is, Nah, it was awesome. It was really awesome. One of my favorite experiences. I have a lot of respect for that man. And then I got flown to Disney World because Sony owns a chunk of it, and they were having an annual meeting of 100 of their CIOs and 100 of their CFOs. I don't know why that combination meets together, but that's what they do. So they brought me there because they wanted me to demonstrate this software, and they wanted to look at rolling it out across Sony, not just CD manufacturing, but everything, Walkmans and so on. That was a lot of fun. Again, being a kid in a situation where, you're a rock star, actually, in a lot of ways. Now, here's the thing. This all came because I found a project, I found a problem that needed to be solved, and I volunteered to solve it. I pointed out the dragon, and I showed the sword. Okay? And this pattern is something I've kept repeating in corporations. Even after Sony, when I became a consultant to corporations, it was the same situation. They would bring me in because they had a problem that they needed to solve. But once I was in, I would see 5,000 other things, and I would pick the few that were very high value to the company and which I found really intriguing. And I would say, you know what? We can help you with this as well. Have you noticed this? Here's how we can solve it. When you have a mindset like this, it gives you an enormous amount of control over the type of work you're doing. And that sense of ownership of the project, the sense that you found this, you created this is your baby, is a lot of fun. I'd have to say I find that far more appealing than being part of a large team where you don't get to choose anything. You don't even get to choose the formatting of the code you write. Now, there are good reasons for that, and in some cases you need that large team and that large project working together like a machine. But I have to say, if you find that difficult, there are other options that you should look at. So I think that's exactly the process. So there's one other thing I wanted to reflect on, which is based on a Quora article. Someone recently, a question that came up in Quora, was someone asking, how do you find motivation in programming? They were losing motivation. And that was what sparked this initial discussion. But there was another part as well that I found, which was when I program in a 40-hour week, let's say, 30 of those hours are spent working with technologies that I haven't mastered yet. And this has happened after nearly 40 years of programming. It's getting close to that. And I find that balance perfect. The reason is, you imagine that, well, I need to be working with technologies I know, otherwise I'm never going to get the problem solved. And it's going to be very inefficient because those learning curves can be very steep. And all of this is true. But what I found in actual experience is that what I don't know is costing me massively in opportunity cost. So if I have a problem, and given the technologies and the solutions and the patterns and the tools I have, and I know, that problem might take 100 hours to solve. But if I spend 10 hours researching new tools, then I can probably solve that problem in 10 hours. I've now spent 20 instead of 100. Big difference. You might say that sounds pretty exceptional and random, but I keep experiencing this to the point that rather than relying on what I think I know as the right solution space to work with, I want to expand and explore my solution space. I want to see what other possibilities I have. Think way outside of the box. Maybe I should be using a third-party service with some APIs. What are those solutions? Maybe there's an off-the-shelf tool. Should I be building this custom? If I build it custom, what patterns and databases and things do I want to use? And finding those areas where I think maybe this would help, that's where I need to start exploring. And most of the time I discover fantastic things that I didn't even know existed. The way I describe it a lot of times is, particularly when a new software release comes out, like a new version of C# or a new version of SQL Server, it's a lot like getting into a James Bond car and you don't know what the buttons do. And you just start pressing them and learning. And for a while it just feels playful and silly and you're time wasting, but you're not at all. Knowing how those buttons work makes you far more powerful in your ability to solve problems. Your kung fu skills go through the roof. So learning is never wasting time. Make sure that learning is built into your regular work week process on your main projects, and I find you'll be a lot happier, a lot more excited to go to work. There's something to learn, there's something to look forward to, there's something new to play with. You need that playfulness. So I hope these musings are of use to somebody, but yeah, programming should be fun. All work should be fun. If your work isn't fun, try approaching it a little bit differently.